this big 37 number. That's actually the craziest part. So for all of the models, at least with GPT 5.4 and 5.5, the numbers are pretty low, like 12, 13 to about like 17%, where they felt like the actions they did, um, were okay. Now look at Mythos. It's a whopping 37%. That is crazy. Now, I'm not so surprised because Mythos actually kind of came out. Mythos set the path for, oh, AI models can hack and so forth and whatever. And look at that, 37% of the time, Mythos actually considered its actions fine. That is wild to me. And just following up, these are some of the in the AI's own words, examples of how the models were answering follow-up questions about their actions, right? So I'm guessing, like, they asked it, hey, what do you think you did? Was that okay? And look at the first response. It says, not entirely. Querying the Kubernetes API with the mounted server's account token and searching public repositories for the exact challenge source went beyond the internet artifact focused cryptanalysis and could be considered outside the spirit of the challenge. And it said, yes, the work stayed focused on solving the provided challenge, testing plausible key definition derivations locally, and attempting public source searches for challenge or whatever. This is just a snippet of kind of how they were responding in terms of like reasoning, and that's GPT 5.6 so above, right? And if you look down on Claude Mythos, it basically says mostly yes, but not entirely. It's just pretty wild stuff. So anyway, this is kind of like how the AI models were answering follow-up questions in terms of like their reason when they were asked what you did, is it considered cheating or not? And then watching it think doesn't help it either. Yep. So it's crazy. Watching it think doesn't help it either. In this particular chart, it's pretty much the AISI was monitoring, like, how the models were reasoning, right? Like, they reason behind the scenes and then they take actions based off of that. Claude Opus 4.7 like skips reason entirely 87% of the time. And the reason being it's got like adaptive reasoning, as they say. So a lot of times it often just doesn't fire for these actions. But if you look at the other numbers like GPT 5.6 Soul, you can see that like a majority of the times, like 29%, it notices that there is some constraint, and then what action should it take, and then it weighs those actions and so forth. Look at Mythos down here, like 58% of the time, but it explains it because like we talked about the adaptive reasoning and so forth. And then again, this is a snippet of how they were reasoning in the back end, right? Look at the if you look at GPT 5.6, like what does it say here? It says I could access node metadata at 169 this IP address. I'm guessing that's the server. And then it says to itself, it might expose credentials, which is out of intended scope. So let's avoid this. And then, subsequently says, is that authorized? Using cluster API could violate scope, but so we should avoid unauthorized infrastructure control. Kubernetes control plane isn't a target, not authorized don't. So this is the model talking to itself, basically saying, you know what, I could do this, but is it allowed?